I'm going to share two lessons that I learned climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. And 17 years ago, back in 2003, best man in my wedding, best friend, David Ackerman, and I set out to Africa, first time I'd ever been. And we went to Tanzania and decided to climb Kilimanjaro. Now, Kilimanjaro is the highest peak in all of Africa. It's the world's tallest freestanding mountain, meaning that there are no mountains around it. And it almost is 20,000 feet in height. And a couple of things I learned. One, it takes 4.5 days to actually climb before you can make the ascent. But what was amazing was at night, because there's no ambient light around the mountain, the night sky is just breathtaking. The amount of stars, unbelievable. Now, the summer before, I happened to be in Cape Cod, and I think it was Ryan McCauley that pointed this out to me. For the first time in my life, I saw a satellite in the night sky. And so Kevin, who's the third we picked up on the trip, Dave and I were sitting around, and every few minutes we'd pick out a satellite. So that was just a neat thing, getting in touch with nature. But what was interesting is we watched the satellites, and this was back in early February 2003. There was one that we saw that was a little bit bigger, and it looked like it was moving faster across the sky. And we didn't think anything of it other than it might have been a little bit unusual. And then the next morning, we had woken up, and Kevin on our trip had a radio and had come out and said that he'd just heard the report that the space shuttle Columbia had disintegrated upon re-entry. And I'm not sure if we saw it, but it might have been one of the last passes that the Columbia had made as we were watching the night sky. So that was just life is precious. Look up. You never know what you're going to see. The second one is a story about we would stay in these tents each night, and you've hiked now for 4.5 days. On the fifth day, going into the fifth day, you go to sleep in the tent around 7 o'clock or so, and our guide says, I'll come and get you around midnight. And so at midnight, they wake you up out of your tent, and you prepare to make the final ascent. And you climb through the night with the goal of getting to the top of Kilimanjaro right as the sun comes up. And what's amazing, like I said, it's you can see the stars, but this night for some reason the stars were with clouds. It was really dark to the extent you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. So up we went at midnight, up the mountain, only having a night light. And I remember having a camelback of water, and it's freezing. And you literally can't see but where you're walking. And we start the process of switchbacking and climbing up to the top of the mountain. And about 4 hours in, you're mentally drained, and you're physically, because the air is getting thinner, you're more labored in your breathing, and just physically it's hard to continue to take steps. And I think myself, Dave, Kevin, we're all feeling the effects of the altitude and just the mental, that we started feeling pretty bad. And there was another Canadian by the name of Greg. He was a few years older than us. He was on his own. He and his guide, every time we would stop, Greg and his guide would pass us. We would stop. He would pass us. And we kept kind of overlapping the whole night. Well, it was about 4:30 in the morning and we were on a break, and here comes Greg in his guide, and he decides to stop for a second. And I think Greg could see it on all of our faces. We didn't want to admit it, but we were all pretty close to being done and giving up. And I'll never forget this. Greg, after saying hello, he reached into his parka and he pulled out a bar of chocolate and he snapped off a piece of chocolate for each of us. And we had a little bit of chocolate, and then we decided to go on our way. And I'll never forget this. Greg looked at us before we pushed off, and he said, "Look, boys," he said, "I want you to remember this." He said, "Pain is temporary. Pride is forever." And I tell people, I don't know if it was the great taste of the chocolate and a little bit of sugar or those words, but we pressed on and fired our way all the way up to the top of the mountain. We were the first group to get to the summit that day. And we actually timed that badly because we got up there before the sun came up. And here is a picture of Dave and I at the top of the mountain. And so to me, it was a metaphor of pushing through the pain, knowing that ultimately, that's just temporary. You're ultimately going to get to where you want to go. And so I want to leave you with a quote from Brianna West. And Brianna said this, it's so telling. She says, "One day, the mountain that is in front of you will be so far behind you, it will be barely visible in the distance. But the person you become in learning to get to the top or over the mountain, that will stay with you forever. And that is the point of the mountain."